When I lost my job, I was devastated. Being fired was over in a flash. There was an email and a week's wages paid into my bank account, and that was it. My marriage collapsed over the months that followed, and soon after, my house was repossessed. That was when I moved to the 20th floor. Growing up in America, living on the upper floors of an apartment block was an aspiration. Here in Scotland, on the outskirts of a cold, grey city, it was very different. For a start, it was called a tower block, not an apartment block. Tower, like something out of medieval times. It wasn't surrounded by a moat. Instead, rubble and broken glass and dog dirt littered the ground all around. There'd been other tower blocks clustered here once. I'd seen them on an old photograph in the public library. I loved the library when I was a kid. I'd take out as many books as I could. Horror books especially. Zombies and werewolves and vampires. They were my favourite. That had been 30 years ago. Now, I was going to the library to keep warm. Without a car, I had to rely on buses that rarely turned up to get there. I had no internet and a cheap mobile that I couldn't use because I hadn't paid the bill. I thought things could not get any worse, but then life dealt me a new card. I received a letter telling me that my claim for unemployment benefits was being suspended. I tore the letter up, then pulled my coat on and trudged 2 miles through the rain to the nearest shops to spend the last of my money on a bottle of whiskey. I was desperate and angry, and I needed to get drunk. And after that, I couldn't think that far ahead. The walk to the shops took me ages, and it was dark by the time I got back. The shared lobby off the entrance to the tower block was decorated with graffiti. Tags were punctuated with obscure offers alongside mobile numbers. Someone had vomited on the floor while I'd been out. I stepped around it and pressed the button for the elevator. The elevator stank and was painfully slow, but it was better than the stairs. After an infuriating wait, the elevator doors opened and I stepped into its urine-soaked embrace. I pressed 20, the doors closed. Then the elevator rattled and began to move. Downwards. Hellfire. It was taking me to the basement. I'd never been to the basement. Why would I? There was nothing down there that I knew of. It was just dead space. My shoulders slumped and I eyed the unopened whiskey bottle in its white plastic bag. I'd spent the walk back from the shops wanting to open it and take a swig, but something had stopped me. A sliver of pride, a sliver of hope maybe. The elevator thudded to a halt. It rattled once more for good measure as the doors opened. Darkness stretched out before me, interrupted only by the white gash of a narrow strip light along the ceiling. There was a large refuse bin, a push bike lying on its side. Remarkably for around here, it still had its wheels. I wondered if it belonged to whoever had pressed the button to call the elevator down here. There was no sign of anyone, and I wasn't going to wait. After all, it was probably teenagers or a junkie. Likely they'd stolen the bike for the trip to their dealers and couldn't wait for the lift to get there. They'd be somewhere in the basement shooting up. 20 was still lit up, but I pressed it again anyway. Good riddance to them. I'll be back in my apartment soon. I double-locked the door and turned the TV on, cranked the volume up as high as I could to try and drown out the neighbours, the pounding music and the screaming that never seemed to end. I was surrounded by noise, but I lived in silence. I could not remember the last time I had spoken, other than the odd mumbled word as I handed over money in the shops or on the bus. The last conversation I had was with my wife, and that had been an argument. If I saw any of the neighbours in the corridor, I'd stare at my feet until they had passed. I don't know anyone's name and did not want to. I reached in the plastic bag and began to unscrew the lid of the whiskey bottle. The elevator shuddered to a halt. I was only up to 2. Damn it. I pressed 20 again and again, slamming my palm against the button. Nothing. It looked like I had no choice. I pressed the door open button and stepped out. The door to my left would take me to the second-floor apartment. On my right, the stairwell waited. I had 18 flights to climb. I leant against the wall, finished unscrewing the lid, and with the bottle still in the plastic bag, lifted it to my lips. The whiskey tasted disgusting, as I knew it would. It was cheap, foul stuff, but it did the trick. I decided a drinking game would help. I would take a slug of whiskey every time I reached a new floor. Yes, that would make it bearable. Smiling for the first time that day, I took another drink, then set off on my ascent. The stairs were narrow and steep. Lights fixed in the ceiling buzzed and flickered. I felt a headache start behind my eyes and paused halfway in between floors to have a drink. I was putting the lid back on the bottle when I heard a noise below me, something lower down the stairwell. I remembered the junkie. Had they given up on the elevator as well and were heading up the stairs now that they'd had their fix? Or was it teenagers after all? Gang members? They all carried knives. I'd seen a program about that on TV. Either way, I did not want them catching up with me, and the noise was getting louder. I swore to myself and hurried up the rest of the stairs to the next floor. I tried not to make any sound, but I could not stop myself gasping because of the exertion as I barged through the door which led onto the third-floor corridor. I'd never seen any police at the block, and had wondered in the past if it was one of the no-go zones I'd read about in the free newspaper that I sometimes found on the bus. If it was a no-go zone for the police, it probably was for the paramedics as well. I stood in the corridor, trying not to think about getting stabbed with a knife or jagged with a needle. If I was, no one would come and help me. The whiskey I'd drunk was burning painfully in my stomach, but I took another gulp anyway. It was going to be okay, I told myself as I swallowed. Whoever it was would be gone soon, back in their own squalid apartment, chasing the dragon or playing shoot-'em-up games or whatever it was people like that did. The buzz of the whiskey was flooding my body, and I kept drinking, stopping to gulp and breathe and then lift the bottle once more to my lips. It was going to be okay. I'd be back in my place soon and I could finish the whiskey in peace. I lowered the bottle, staggered a little, then heard the door to the stairwell open. I froze. There was someone behind me, moving towards me. Only it wasn't footsteps I could hear. It was a scraping, scratching sound, like something sharp was being dragged along the ground. I turned, slowly, reluctantly, and saw a nightmare. A creature conjoined from the darkness. It was tall and slender. Its skin was taut and pale. It had the beginnings of hands and feet, but these tapered out into jagged edges that looked sharp. Its eyes were red, vivid and penetrating as they fixed me in their gaze. Its nose was flattened, bat-like against its face. As I stood, staring, this monstrous apparition shuffled forwards, and I realized the scraping was the sound of its claws catching the floor beneath it. Sweat ran from my face. All the strength had drained from my limbs, but I knew I had to run. The creature was seconds away from me, and I could see trails of spittle glistening between long, twisted fangs. I stumbled backwards, away, and then I ran. I hammered on doors as I careened down the corridor. "Help me!" I cried. "Someone help me!" No one answered. No one ever did in this block, because no one cared. And I had reached the end of the corridor. There was nowhere else to go. There was just the final door. I slapped it, kicked it, I pleaded. The creature was close enough to touch. Its breath was hot against my skin and fetid. It stank of decay, of death. The door clicked and opened. A crack of light appeared, and the line of a door chain draped in peace. Whoever was inside swore, a torrent of abuse, as they told me to go to hell. I'm already there, I thought, and a manic laugh bubbled inside me as the creature turned its grotesque glare on the gap in the door. Then, with a single sweep of a claw, it sliced through the chain, then pushed open the door. The man stood there. He was skinny, wearing a stained vest and shiny tracksuit bottoms. As he gawped, open-mouthed at the creature, a dark patch spread out over his crotch. And then, I swear the creature smiled as it looped a claw around the back of the man's neck and pulled him forwards, towards its mouth. Its jaws made a cracking sound and opened wide. And then, it bit. Its fangs pierced the man's scalp and the underside of his chin. Blood splurted, showering the walls and the ceiling. And me. I felt the hot, thick liquid strike my skin. It brought me out of my daze. The creature's attention was fixed on its kill. That was clear. This was my chance, my only chance to get away. I darted past it and sprinted back down the corridor and through the door to the stairwell. I hesitated, torn between the sanctuary of my flat and getting out of the building. Out, I decided. 3 flights versus 17. I raced down the stairs, almost falling, but made it and exploded out into the lobby, where another creature waited. Its appearance was the same as the thing I had just encountered, but I could see that it had long flaps of skin folded over on its back. It was hunched over a body, a woman. Her arms and legs were twitching as the pool of blood around her grew. The creature's mouth was over her throat, and it was oblivious to me. I staggered past and outside into the night. Derelict ground stretched out before me. I needed to keep going, to get away, but I could barely breathe after running down the stairs. I bent over, put my hands on my knees, and glanced back up at the block. A pale shape circled the building. Slender wings rising from its back showed in the light from the windows. It was looking for a way in, I knew. A new victim. All it had to do was look down though, and it would see me. There was no way I could make it across the open ground before this happened. I moved back towards the block, pressed my back against the wall, and tried to make myself as small as possible. I stood there, shivering, waiting to be discovered. Time felt as if it had stopped, and I thought that the night would never end. But when light finally began to creep into the sky, I knew I was safe, for a few hours at least, because I believed I understood now what they were. The creatures. They were vampires, but not the blood-drinking, brooding immortals of literature that I'd once loved. They were vicious, unthinking monsters driven to slaughter by their hunger, and the tower block was their hunting ground. The people who lived in the block, their prey. I decided there and then that was not going to be my fate. Darkness was the vampires' time. They would be hiding from the light now. I would take this opportunity to escape. I started walking. I had nowhere to go, apart from away. I had no money, no friends, no family. There were soup kitchens in the city centre, shop doorways to sleep in, ways to score drugs to get me through the night if I couldn't find booze. I hesitated. All I had done for a long time was spiral. I'd given up, and then given up some more, and it was never going to end. Unless... I turned around and headed back to the block. A dark smear stained the floor of the lobby. It could have been anything if you did not know it was blood. The woman's body was gone, likely taken to the creature's lair. I made my way up the stairs and along the third-floor corridor. At the far end, another stain lay across the floor. The door was closed. There was nothing else, no sign. But I knew. I returned to the stairs, walked up to the 20th floor, and let myself into my apartment. I still had my bottle of whiskey in its plastic bag. I went to the kitchen, poured a measure of whiskey into the nearest thing I had to a clean glass, then broke a chair against the wall. I took the pieces into the front room along with the whiskey and a kitchen knife, and I began to carve. I could keep running. I could spend the rest of my life running. Or I could stay and fight. I held up the wooden stake I'd carved from the broken leg of the chair and smiled.
Happy Valentine's Day weekend to everyone. Not a lot of romance happening in the Gribble house, but we did have a lot of action. On Sunday evening this past week, a pair of childhood friends named Katie and Lauren investigated with us. The two girls had a mutual friend that had passed away when they were kids, named Lauren. As they investigated, they could hear her name being said through the ghost box. Several times in a row, and all over the warehouse. The girls told our lead investigator, Kelly, that she had been to see a psychic in the past and had been told that her deceased friend Lauren was definitely with her. Another group investigating on Sunday night were using the Ovilus on dictionary mode, and they had both the Ovilus and the spirit box say, "Save her," twice in a row. While Kelly was seated in the slave quarters with several guests who were investigating, they heard from a spirit named Anthony and his wife, as well as a child spirit named Will. Tuesday night was great as well. The ghost box and ghost meters were the star of the show that night. A ton of different names came through, like Adam, Helen, Tom, Meredith, and of course, Paul. Paul was his regular charming self, and called one of the investigators as Fat Ass. One of the women investigating asked, "Why would you say such a thing?" To which she got the response of his laughter through the ghost box. Paul was fairly cooperative that night, actively communicating through the ghost box with several groups of guests. However, when they requested that he do things like touch their hands or move the EMF detectors, his response was simply no. We got some amazing EVPs that night through the ghost boxes. One group investigating asked a spirit if they were nice, to which they got the response, "What do you want?" Another group got a sinister response from their questions. They asked a spirit named Tom, who told them that he was the one who killed Meredith and the lady by the door. The investigation on Friday night went great as well. Orbs were everywhere, as well as EMF and ghost meter action. Don't forget about the Raggedy Ann doll. Several times during the evening, she lit up from head to toe, not just the hands or feet separately. One man investigating told a female spirit that he was communicating with that if anything or anyone decided to follow him home that evening, that he would be very ticked off. The only response that he got to that was laughter through the ghost box, along with the word clown. Another group was using the spirit box, and ended up conversing with a soldier from the Revolutionary War who answered questions about the battle through the ghost meter. The battle was the Siege of Savannah. A few children were heard from Friday night as well. One little box told the investigators that his name was Leo. When they said goodbye to Leo for the night, the right hand of the Raggedy Ann doll lit up. Over near the residual haunting area, they could hear children's giggles through the spirit box. When Kelly was leaving the warehouse for the night, she thought that she could see an older man standing inside the gated area of the Gribble house. Needless to say, she left with chills that evening. Last night, on Valentine's Day, we had 2 separate investigations. During the first, the Raggedy Ann doll had some very interesting action. While seated in the slave quarters, everyone investigating was focused on the doll, just as the doll moved all on its own. A little child named Wendy was heard from the spirit box in the slave quarters as well, and the REM pod lit up with small touches. As the guests were leaving the warehouse from the first hour, a few of them were looking back into the building and swore that they saw 2 women entering the area by the bathroom. But no one was there. During the second investigation, a group of 2 saw a black shadow figure moving along the Gribble house walls, accompanied by a dramatic drop in temperature as well as whispers and strange noises. Yet another great week of investigation at the Gribble house paranormal experience. My boyfriend and I were big fans of nautical history, so we decided to spend our Valentine's Day in 2007 on the Queen Mary. As I'm sure most of you are aware, it's reported to be haunted. That was also the kind of thing that appealed to us, but mostly we have BAs in European history, so it was just cool in general. Anyhow, we got a historical suite, meaning that it was mostly like it had been when the ship was commissioned aside from an old TV. The first night, Valentine's Day night, when we stayed there, we both woke up to what sounded like the drawers of the built-in dresser being opened and slammed shut repeatedly. We're both not the types to freak out and run, but I can't really say why we were both so low-key that we just acknowledged that the other was okay and eventually went back to sleep. Mainly because it was truly alarming at the time. Maybe we just trusted that if we were both okay, that everything else was okay? I really don't know. But then, we didn't know the history about the room. The next day, we went on the ghost tour. Turns out that we were sleeping in the second most haunted room on the ship. The room next door was Churchill's suite, where he planned battles during World War II. While we didn't experience the cigar smell that many have reported while staying in that room, it was still interesting that without knowing our room was known to have paranormal events happen, we did have an experience. We had some really weird camera malfunctions in the engine room, as well as creepy, aggressive feelings in an old museum room on the ship, which we only found because we tried to get into every unlocked room that there was. It honestly felt like someone was creeping up behind our backs. But again, just feelings, so shrug. Anyway, that's my Valentine's Day ghost story. I am a 19-year-old female. When I was 8, right around Valentine's Day, I received one of those small manila envelopes in the mail. It had no return address, but it was sent from another state, where I didn't know anyone from. When I opened it, it was simply a folded sheet of computer paper with a picture of Linus from Charlie Brown, holding a heart and his blanket. It appeared to be drawn and colored by hand. On the inside was a short Valentine's Day message with a small personal detail about my life that only someone close to me would know. Naturally, I thought it was probably my grandparents or my parents trying to do something nice for me. Every year, it had a picture of Linus, included a detail about my life, was typed in the same font, and was from a different state. For example, the Valentine's Day after I adopted my dog Bailey, the card said, "Would Bailey be jealous if you were my Valentine?" I kept most of these, and managed to find a few as I was rummaging through old, worthless junk. When I got older, I finally mentioned it to my grandparents, fully expecting it to be them, but they swore that they weren't the ones sending the cards. I honestly believe it, because I had expressed my concerns by this point, and they aren't the type that want to scare me. Neither are my parents. The only other family I have in the US are my dad's parents, who don't speak English well and have never owned a computer. They had immigrated here, and there was no way for them to know people in so many states. Aside from my parents and my brother, who found it strange as well, I have no other family. I still get these cards every year, always the same except for one Valentine's Day a few years ago. I received a stuffed teddy bear and a big chocolate heart along with the card. Needless to say, I did not eat the chocolate, and I searched that bear, half convinced that there would be a hidden camera. After that year, I started just receiving the cards again. In any case, as a child, it was sort of exciting and mysterious, like a secret admirer. Now, it's just unnerving. I have racked my brain for years trying to find out who it could possibly be, and I have come up empty-handed. It still makes me uneasy, but if this person wanted to hurt me, I think that they would have done it by now. I've never felt outwardly threatened by them, so I don't think there's much that I can do about it. When I was in high school, I lived in a really small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related or hated each other. I had no family tree there, so yeah. But I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend, and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just petty harassment and occasional fights, but it had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house while her parents went out. Just better to avoid trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store for a movie and went to the Dairy Queen for some ice cream, and then headed home. Now she lives in the complete boonies, out in the middle of the woods along a long, lonely road with no streetlights. We're chatting, eating our blizzards, when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. What was a very big deal was that when the headlights flooded the interior of our car, I saw two hands on the back seat and a head coming from the hatchback part of the vehicle. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out my pocket knife, which was the only thing I had. She saw me and asked what was wrong. Loudly, I said, "Nothing, I just have to stop at my friend's house real quick." She knew that that was crap. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to jump out too. She popped out in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full maniac mode. This guy popped up like a jack-in-the-box, with empty hands waving around saying, Hey, what are y'all up to tonight?" It was some strange kid from our high school who we had never in our entire lives spoken to before. Ever. I said, "What in the holy hell are you doing in our car?" His reply was, "I thought you guys were going to the dance and I was just hitching a ride." We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere in some random person's driveway, so whatever he was planning was totally forgotten. We actually ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he's telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, no. We dropped his ass off and noped out of there as soon as we could. After he got out of the car, my girlfriend started crying and shaking. She was so freaked out. I have no idea what he was trying to do when the lights caught him crawling out of that hatchback. I hated that high school. Before I begin my story, I'll give you a quick summary of the location where this happened. At my middle school, in the other half of the building built in the 1950s at some point. All the classrooms have little windows next to them. My reason for bringing this up is a horrifying event that took place during my 5th class today involving one of these said windows. I walked into the classroom and set my stuff down, preparing to ask the boy next to me named Cameron if he had a pencil. As I was about to open my mouth, I heard a loud smacking sound followed by a crunch, followed by a shattering type noise. Sort of like when you drop a box of pencils or markers. All of a sudden, I was deafened by screams of shock and agony. My classmates were now in the hall, shocked by something just barely out of my line of sight. I walked into the hallway with them. Being on the shorter end of the height spectrum, I had to shove my way to the front of the group. What I saw next will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. I saw a girl rolling around on the floor, smearing blood on the dirty linoleum tiles. At first I couldn't tell what happened, but I got the picture after a few seconds. This girl was a special needs student. After being rejected by a boy in her class, she went completely ballistic and without thinking had punched one of the windows next to a neighboring classroom's door. There was broken glass and blood everywhere. Thankfully, the classroom next to ours is vacant, and no one was in there at the time of the incident. After about 10 minutes, teachers got the situation calmed down. The girl was completely insane and tried to fight the man who came to help her. The school ended up going into a lockdown. She had to go to the hospital, and even though no one really knew her, we were all in legitimate shock by the horrible scene. I really hope that she's getting the help she needs, and hope that she doesn't have a fistful of glass shards. I've seen some really crazy things at my school, but that might have been the most messed up thing I've ever witnessed. This happened February 14th, Valentine's Day. Me and 2 of my friends decided that we would get a cheap hotel room and take some LSD to kick off the loneliest holiday ever. I've done it before, but was not in a good mindset to take it that night, so I settled for a bottle of wine. Anyway, we weren't familiar with the area of the hotel, but it was cheap, and that's all that mattered to us. It was around 3 in the morning, and outside the door we hear someone stumbling around, bumping into the walls. But it was Valentine's Day anyway, so we just brushed it off as a drunk couple on their way to get it on. The stumbling stopped and went silent right outside of our door. My friends are tripping at this point, and I'm pretty drunk. We hear this woman start sobbing outside, and I'm assuming that she sat down with her back on our door because we heard her slide down the wall and collapse right on the other side. The woman starts trying to speak to us through the cracks of the door, saying that she lost her dogs and was wondering if we could help her. It was 3 a.m., and we didn't know anything about the area, like I said, so common sense would dictate don't respond. And we didn't. The woman then proceeds to bang on the door, saying that we stole her dogs, and that she's gonna come in and quote-unquote effing murder us. She was scratching and banging on the door for 10 minutes straight, and then just stopped. My friends were starting to have a bad trip because of her, but when she stopped, I tried to reassure them that she was gone and that they could go back to having a good time. To prove it to my friends, I checked through the peephole to verify that this woman was indeed gone. But there she was, trying to stare right back at me through the other side of the peephole. I watched her as she stepped back and stood there, as still and solid as a literal concrete statue. She had her eyes right on mine. I doubt that she could see me through the peephole, but I was making dead eye contact with her. The woman then proceeds to start screaming and throwing her body against the door, which thankfully woke up our neighbors and they called the front desk. The woman behind the front desk comes and tries to get this woman to leave. The woman left, but was going down the walkways of the hotel being loud and refusing to actually leave the property. She was still crying out for her lost dogs in the hotel hallway at 3 a.m. They said that they never saw her leave and implied that she was still inside, so they just told me to keep an eye out for her and call the front desk if anything else happened. The police were called and stayed posted outside the hotel for an extra 30 minutes and then left. It turns out that she was on some really heavy drugs. But still, hearing this woman throw her body onto the door, saying that she would kill us, was incredibly traumatizing. We left early that morning and never went back. About 2 years ago, I was going shopping for a Valentine's Day gift for my girlfriend. It's about a 5 to 10 minute walk to the store from where I live. It was around 8 p.m. and I just wanted to get home. I was walking in the road because there's next to no cars going down the road, and I didn't feel like going through the park. I was approaching the park when I realized that I was being followed. I thought nothing of it at first, so I just kept walking. He then got closer and closer, and when I was walking past, I hear a, "Hey kid." I was shocked, but I wanted to ignore him, so I kept going. Then he said it again, a bit more violently. So I turned around, and this guy was within reach of me. I'm 6'1", and this man was a bit taller. He then tried to set up a conversation like, "How's your night?" I felt a bit relieved, and kinda thought poorly of myself for judging him too soon. But I was right in my assumptions. He then tried to keep a conversation going and proceeded to ask me where I was headed. I just told him that I was going to the store. He then walked up to a car and said, "I can give you a ride." I said, "No thanks, I can walk from here." He kept asking that same question, and then he said, "What about car surfing?" And then he tried to show me what it was. I still declined. This guy was really creeping me out. I was still walking down the road while this was happening. He followed me still, and thankfully I was reaching the store, so he left me alone. But not for long. I got the candy heart chocolate box and a teddy bear, and was walking back home when I saw the guy again. The weird part is that he was following me from the other side. I feel like he waited for me just to come walking by again. This was starting to scare me. He then yelled at me again, and I was terrified. I was hesitant, but I turned around. Now he was starting to jog his way over to me. Then I noticed something off. The car was gone, meaning that this guy had either walked here or he wasn't alone. I acted oblivious, like I didn't notice that the car was gone. He tried starting another conversation. I was really uncomfortable, so I just said, "I really need to get back," and I started walking faster toward the fastest route home, which is through an alley. When I was going through, he was gone, and I was thankful. But when I was walking down the alley, I don't know what it was, but I saw the same car that he was claiming as his own. When I got home, I wanted to know more about this guy. I looked online for something about him and there was nothing, of course. I wanted to know about the car. I didn't believe for a second that it was his, so I looked it up, and it was reported as stolen. I reported it just in case. I'm not sure if they ever found it, or ever found the guy in general. I just hope that I never have to deal with him again. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed these true scary stories, and if you did, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons for me along with that notification bell to stay updated on all the latest content. To have your own horror story featured, feel free to submit it to me via the email included below in the description. Also down there you can find the links to other playlists with lots more awesome creepy content for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Until then, don't forget to embrace the terror.